water
All right,
on-the-Daf. It's much safer.
probably. Good evening. I hope you're all doing well. A big thank you to Rabbi Handler for covering for the last 9 days. I'm not done as I'm starting tomorrow is my first day jumping into the shark waters. We'll see how it goes. But in general, I do plan to be here. I actually don't know what's going to be Thursday night. I have to see what my schedule looks like. Right now, it doesn't look so pasha. But tonight, we're going to learn about a blot and a half. I should say a blot or 3/4 of a blot. And then tomorrow, Nurse Hashem will finish up the Masechta. Baruch Hashem, the longest Masechta in Shas by far, I would say, by many blot, that's for sure. And Sanhedrin is no slouch Masechta either. And I'm excited for that. I have never learned Sanhedrin other than minor sugyas here and there. When I was in Kola, we did it in morning seder, so I learned 10 blot well, but and I don't remember any of it. But we'll discuss my inadequacies later. Today we're starting from the bottom of Kuf Ayin Daled Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom in Amar of Huna, and we'll be stopping about 2/3 of the way down on Kuf Ayin Hey Amud Beis. Let's jump right in. 3 sugyas, and then we'll get to the Mishnah at the bottom of Kuf Ayin Hey Amud Aleph. Amar of Huna Shchiv Meirash Hektish Kol Nechasa. Man's on his deathbed. He wants to be maktish all of his properties to hektish, and he does so. But then he adds in a caveat afterwards. Amar mana laploni biyadi. Oh, forgot to mention, I owe $100 to David. So the Shchiv Meira is talking out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, he said kol nechasai, but then he recanted a little bit and said, well, not kol nechasai, really mana laploni biyadi. The halacha is ne'eman. Why? Because chazaka ein adam ose kinunya al hektish. Nobody plays these games. There's no trickeries when it comes to hektish. Obviously, you just forgot. Obviously. Now, what does this imply? It implies that a person doesn't do a kinunya by hektish, but l'chora he does it everywhere else, right? This says the Gemara, Maskif Rav Nachman. Hang on 1 second. Is it true that a kinunya is only that we say ein adam oseh kinunya by hektish, v'chiyadam oseh kinunya al banav? Would a person make a kinunya on their son? The Rav Shmuel Damar Tarvai Shchiv Meira Sha'amar. If there's a Shchiv Meira who already dedicated property to his children, and then Sha'amar Mana Laploni Biyadi, the halacha there is not the same as it was like we just saw by hektish. In the case of hektish, we said the guy is neman. Here it depends. So the Gemara says Amar Tnu Nosnin. If the language of the Shchiv Meira was to say Tnu, to give over this property, I already told you, my dear children, I'm going to give you my properties. Oops, I forgot about this money that I owed to David, $100. So there, the Gemara says, only if you say Tnu Nosnin, Lo Amar Tnu Ein Nosnin. Now, what's happening over here, as the last line of Rashi explains, is what basically, the Rashbam, I should say, is we have a guy over here who wants to make sure that nobody thinks he's an overly wealthy person. Alma, what we see from here is that Adam Asui Shalo Lehasbias Banav. A person is allowed to create a scenario where it looks like he's not oversatiating his children. In other words, that he's not wealthy. The last line of the Rashbam says Shalo Lehasbia. Niskaven Shalo Yachziku Ka'asher Lohu V'Labanav. So what does he do? He says, actually, you know what, my children, I can't let you keep all of it. I actually owe some to David. Now, if the Shchiv Meira doesn't say Tnu, the money doesn't go to David. It's a Kinunya. It's a Kinunya. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. If that's true that you can do such a thing to show that you're not wealthy, turning to the top of Kufayin Hamad, maybe the whole thing that was happening with Hektish, this guy, he sounds like a chosh of a gavra. He's got all this money. He gave everything to Hektish. Maybe the reason why he said, I owe David $100 in the Hektish case, maybe it's just to show that he's not such a gavra rabbi, just like we saw in the case by the kids. So Meichatesi should be Neman. Where does the din of Rav Huna come from? It says the Gemara, that's a great question. And 2 lines down on Kufayin Hamad, Al Kika Amar Rav Huna Hasam, the Nakit Shtara. Oh, so there's different cases. Maybe the case of Rav Huna, where he said that the guy was maktish kol nechasav to hektish, and then he recanted and said, I owe 100 to David. There, that's with a star. And because it's with a star, so then ne'eman. Says the Gemara, Amar Tnu, Michlal, 3 lines down, that implies if the case of Rav Huna is with a star, and that's where we say Ne'eman, that implies that the case of the Rabu Shmuel, where he said it depends if you say Tnu, that's the lo nakid shtara. That must be a case where there is no star. Because if Rav Huna's case is categorically correct, that a person who is makdish nechasav lehekdesh can recant, and its neman is only with a star, it must be that in order to make the case is shtim, that Rav and Shmuel must not be where there was a star. It must be a milva al peh. And then in such a case, says the Gemara, Amar Tnu Nosnen, if in a case where a person taka does say Tnu without a star, and we would say to give, that's milva al pehava, right? But that's a problem. Why? Because Virav Shmuel Damar Tavar milva al peh eno gova lo min yoshim lo min al kuchos. Oh, okay. Hold on one second. We have two cases over here. We have Rav Huna and we have Rav and Shmuel. If Rav Huna is talking about a star, and Rav and Shmuel are talking about a milva al peh, doesn't work. Because the Rav and Shmuel over here have to be talking about a star. How do I know? Because Rav and Shmuel hold it by milva al peh, that you never transfer over money by milva al peh. Can't be that there's no star. So the Gemara rejects this first approach that Rav Huna is talking about a star and Rav and Shmuel are not. Ela Amar Rav Nachman, 10 lines down, really, both Rav Huna and Rav and Shmuel, they're both talking about a case where there is a star. That is not the difference between them. Lokasha, what is the difference between them? Ha de mekuyam, ha de lo mekuyam. In the case of Rav Huna, the star was mekuyam, and because the star was mekuyam, he was ne'eman. And in the case of Rav Shmuel, ha lo ha de lo mekuyam, it was not mekuyam, and therefore we added the qualifier that you needed to say tnu. If you said tnu, we'll give over. You're right. I owe David 100. We can deduct it from the amount of money that I've earmarked for the children. And without tnu, it doesn't work. Amar tnu kaime l'shtari, lo amar tnu lo kaime l'shtari. And it's all based on the word tnu. All of this is sugya number one of trying to understand the din of Rav Huna. And Lamaisa, it seems that Rav Huna and Rav and Shmuel are all correct, but they're just different cases. One is where the star was mekuyam, which is where Rav Huna says that if you're makdish nechasav lahekdesh, that you can make a slight recant and just say, I meant everything except for what I owe David. And Rav and Shmuel will say only if you say tnu. The next case says the Gemara, Amar Rabba Shchibmei Amar Mana Leploni Biyadi, a Shchibmei that says, I have $100 that belongs to somebody. But Amru Yisomim, the Yisomim then say, Paranu, we paid off David already. The halacha is ne'emanim. The halacha is that we trust the children. Now, in this language, it just said Mana Leploni Biyadi, right? Now look at the next language. Tnu man leploni. Tnu is a stronger language. Isn't that what we just learned? That Tnu is a language that is kaimuha. That tells us that the star is mekuyam. So if the Shchimera is using language of Tnu man leploni, v'amri yisam paranu, we should have expected a starker answer. But here it's backwards. We say ein ne'emanin. Whoa, wait 1 second. If Tnu is a stronger language, then why is it that in the case where it doesn't say Tnu, the kids, some of them are ne'eman to say we paid them back. But where it does say Tnu, it's a neman and klape elaya. What is it that exactly we're talking about? Of course, klape elaya is a very sharp, strong language. Ipcha mistabra. It would have made more sense that in the case of tnu, we would have been more serious. Amar tnu mana kevan de paskavu on the milsa ikal memar de pare. Because we know that the father said tnu, the father said to the children, make sure. Tnu, stark language, make sure to pay back David. So then, of course, we should assume the kids paid back. But mana leploni biyad, if we use the weaker language without tnu, so kevan de lo pastak avon the milsa, iklamemar de lo pare. So what exactly was going on here with this piece of Gemara from Rabbah? It seems backwards. Rabbah wanted to say where we don't say tnu, we believe the kids. Where the father at the Shchimera does say tnu, we don't believe the kids. That's backwards. Ella halfway down. Ella itmar hachi idmar. It must be that what Rabbah is saying is like this. Shchimei Rash Amar Mana Leplani Biyadi v'Amar Yisomim Chazar v'Amar Lanu Abba Parati Ne'eman. Oh, so now it's not the kids who are Ne'eman. They're going back and saying the father was Chozer. So let's see what happened over here. The father on the deathbed said Mana Leploni Biyadi. Then the children tained, my father actually said that it was actually a debt that was paid. So then the children are believed to say that the father said that he paid. My taima, it kure mitkar. It's normal for a person to remember something. People forget things all the time. My son asked me something just now in Eretz Yisrael. I Pasha forgot the answer. 24 hours later, I woke up in the morning. I'm like, oh, I remember the answer now. That happens all the time. We call them senior moments, but they're not limited to seniors, as I try to tell myself. We forget things all the time. We're tired, we're overburdened, we don't really focus in the first place, right? That's a lot of the memory challenges that we have isn't because we have bad memories, it's because we have bad learning habits. They're totally different. If we're not totally locked in, it's easy to forget. However, tnuman leploni v'amar yisamim chazar v'amar abba parati einemanin. De'im isa depare lo hav amar tnu. Tnu is a language. It's a sharp, strong language. Someone who paid that debt would never have said the line in the first place. Of course you paid it already. So that's a wonderful explanation of Rabbah that explains why without Tnu, it's one way, it's the weaker way, it's the stronger way, and with Tnu, it's the weaker way. Because we said in the case of the guy forgot, he remembered. With Tnu, no one who actually paid the debt would ever say Tnu. That brings us to our third case for the day, 7 or 8 lines from the bottom of the page. Shchiv meira shehode mahu. If we have a case of a shchiv meira, that he owes someone money and he admits it, mahu, what are the parameters when we would believe him to say this? Tzarach lomar atem edai, or ein tzarach lomar atem edai? Does he need to say, and you were there when it happened? Does he need to actually have witnesses? When there isn't, this is a fascinating din, I didn't know this. When there are no edim, if I say I owe you money, it doesn't that's not halachically binding. It's milveh al peh, right? Or the language is al peh. So says the Gemara over here, or the Rishonim explain this over here, that tzarach lomar atem edai under normal circumstances. We're only asking by a shchiv meira. That by a shchiv meira, because his words are more binding, do we say tzarach lomar atem edai? Or ein tzarach lomar atem edai? But under a normal circumstance, if I just say, out of the blue, not that you make a taina and I'm modeh, that's just out of the blue, I owe you $50. I do not owe you $50. Now, under normal circumstances, but by a shchiv meira, because his words hold more power, so therefore, maybe that's the case. Or perhaps we should say, tzarach lomar ksuvu. Maybe the shchiv meira should say, you need to write it down. Oh, ein tzarach lomar ksuvu. And really the bigger question is, adam mishata b'shas misa, or ein adam mishata b'shas misa? Do people joke around during the time of death, yes or no? Do they say these comments in a haphazard kind of a way? Because we're trying to measure that shchiv meira, right? If the shchiv meira is not a jokester, then everything should be binding. If the shchiv meira is being very technical and he's just trying to, I don't know why in the last hours of a person's life, why anyone would do that. But the Gemara wants to know, is a person a mishatz, a basar to buy. What?
Just push him off. He's dying. He really doesn't want to deal with this guy if he pushes him off that way. That's usually what Mashat did, like force somebody to do something. So really to push him off, I would imagine.
Could be. Could be. Yeah, I didn't see a
Mashat in this context means joking, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know because the Rishonim here don't really talk about it. I'm trying to find something quick.
Regular case of Mashat any buck.
Right.
Fascinating case. I'm running away from somebody and you have a boat that can take me away and you charge me an exorbitant sum and I agree to it. Once you get offshore,
I don't have to pay.
Mashat any buck. I've never intended to pay you what you were.
Your ridiculous amount of money.
I just said anything to get you to do what I wanted, but obviously
Right.
I'm never going to pay you that. So
Okay.
it's called Mashat any buck.
It's some type of
So in this case,
trickery.
probably just to still claim it because
he says I owe you
He's
money.
dying here. I really don't.
And then once he's dead, he owes nothing. Could be.
That would be my guess.
All right.
So just swear to me that you'll pay me.
Shavu is
He's
different.
smart.
Shavu
He's
is
smart. He's got Adam around, and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera.
So says the Gemara, how do we paskin? Basar de baya hadar pashta. Ain't other mishat b'shas misa. People don't do that. They don't do this trickery, this last minute ruse. And the divrei shchimera kiksuvin v'chimisurin damo. Allah chalamaysa, nothing to worry about. If the guy says this, that I owe you money, even though it's without edim, even if it's without ksuba, we assume that ain't on the mishat b'shas misaso, and therefore Allah chalamaysa, divrei shchimera is kiksuvin v'chimisurin damo. This is quoted in Shulchan Aruch, Choshen Mishpat, Siman Reish Nun, Sif Aleph, as you can see on the side. Baruch Hashem, we're starting the last Mishnah in the Masechta. These are all dinim that we've learned and scattered throughout this Masechta, probably numerous times over. And what we're going to do is learn this Mishnah. We're going to learn a massive chakira in the Gemara and between the Tanoim, between the Amoraim, excuse me, and then we'll stop about 2/3 of the way down. The final Mishnah reads 2 lines before the bottom of Kufayin Hey Amud Aleph. Hamalves chaveru b'shtar, a person who lends money to a friend with a shtar. Therefore, govim min nechasim mishubadim. If ever there's a need to recollect, I can recollect from the nechasim mishubadim. If they're lent al yedei edim, but not al yedei shtar, so then only govin min nechasim b'nei chorin. This is fascinating because it shows us a ranking of the power of a shtar over edim. That a shtar is very, very powerful, and edim are less powerful. So that means that I can collect from any property you own if there's a shtar. And if there isn't a shtar, I can only collect from unused properties. That brings us to the top of Kufayin Hamid Beis. Let's say a person doesn't have a proper shtar, but they have a document that's ksav yado, his handwriting. What does this mean? So the Rashbam on the top of the page says, Dibur hamaschil, hotzi alav malve ksav yado shel love, shehu chayev lo mamon, ve'ein kan edus acheres. This is it. The guy, it's a scrap of paper. He wrote down, I owe you, and that's it. So says the Gemara, the Mishnah, and that is an in-between state. And therefore, it's not really considered like a shtar, even though it's handwriting. And it's also not really considered edus, but it's also not considered a zero, because there's no edus, and it's really not a shtar. But still, it's enough to trigger the bringing on of collecting from Bnei Chorn. Let's say that there was an arev, a guarantor, hayotze la'achar chitum shtaros. The guarantor's name is after the chitum shtaros, as often is the case whenever a young married takes out a loan and their father or their parents is a co-signer. You did that for me once, actually. Dad, you did that when I became a Moel. You were the co-signer on a loan I took from the Chicago Chesed Fund or something. I had to post date, I had to pre-write 60 checks, whatever the payments were. My dad was the co. Do you remember that? Maybe not.
I didn't receive the 10% yet.
No. We can discuss that if you want to go into business together. So says the Gemara, if there's an arev, so then in those cases, again, also twilight zone a little bit. It's only binding to some degree. So there was a story about Rabbi Shmuel. There was a case that was brought to him, and he said that you can be gova only from nechasim that are bnei chorin. Amar lo ben nanas. A nanas in the Hebrew vernacular is someone who's very short, a dwarf of some kind, a very small person. Ben nanas probably was that kind of person. As we know, a lot of the names Klein is Kleinigkeit and Schechter are Shochtem, and all of the names that we have, a lot of them make sense. Amar lo ben nanas, no. In such a case, Eino gova lo minichasim mishubadim lo minichasim nechor, and the arev is a zero. Amar lo lama. They said to ben nanas, why is that? And he had a fascinating answer. Amar lo harei hachonek esechad b'shuk. Ruvain is strangling Levi in the shuk. Mitzal chaveru Shimon comes around and says, Amar lo hanach v'ani yaten lach. Don't stop killing the guy. I'll pay you. So says the Gemara, Pater. The arev who came to save the day by throwing money at the Malveh, who wanted to get his money back. Reuben was strangling Levi. Shimon comes along and says, I'll be the arev. He's pater. Shelo al emunaso halvehu. Why? Because the Malveh, Reuven, did not give the Love the money based on the guarantee of a third party. And therefore, when the arev comes in and says, everybody relax, I'll be, he's good for it. Don't worry. I'll take, no, that's a zero. The arev is completely pater. Eleizu arev shu chayev. Who would be a guarantor that is chayev? So now we have a machlokas between Ben Nanas and Rabbi Shmuel, because Rabbi Shmuel said, Govim min nechasim b'nei chorin. Ben Nanas said, Lo min nechasim mishubadim, lo min nechasim b'nei chorin. Because Ben Nanas said that an arev is only chayev in certain cases. So when it's an arev chayev, says the Mishnah 10 lines down, halveu v'ani nosen lach. That's when Shimon says to Ruvain, lend to Levi. You have to say it up front. You're only an arev if you say it up front, according to Ben Nanas. then chayiv shekain al emunah so helvei, because then the whole loan only took place because of the fact that Shimon the Arev was a guarantor. But when the Arev swoops in the 11th hour, that's not called an Arev. That, okay, you saved the guy's life, you deserve a reward, but by no means are you chayiv to pay that money that you just guaranteed. Being that the guy Reuven in this case is a strangler, I would be careful not to pay, but halachically, you're not chayiv to pay. And then the Mishnah takes a beautiful response over here. V'amar Rabbi Shmuel, who was the Baal Plugta, if you remember from 8 lines ago. 4th line down, Rabbi Shmuel said, you collect from the Chasim Nechor. Once he heard Ben Nana's talk, he said, Harotze sheyachkim, yasok b'dinei mammon. It's a very well-known line, that somebody who wants to become wise should learn choshen mishpat. She'ein lecha mikzoa b'Torah, yoser mehen. There is no mikzoa. Profession is how we would literally translate that. That there's no mikzoa that is, according to some girsas, that are gadol mehen. Vehein kema'ayan hanoveya. They are like a flowing spring, which is a fascinating mashal. I can just speak for me. I find Choshen Mishpat easier than Yevamos. Just already, just now.
Today's Daf. Unbelievable.
How many times in first class was it quoted? How many times? Plenty. Now, Rotze Sheyasok B'dinei Momenes, and a person who wants to really. So the Gemara says that if a person wants to be Osek B'dinei Momenes, who's the best person to learn it from? Yeshamesh es Shimon ben Nanas. So that's how the Gemara, the Mishnah concludes over here with this machlokes about Arev, but it seems to be the Rabbi Shmuel bowed his head in humility before Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas to say he's right and I'm wrong, that Arvos is only when the Arvos is full, but not when the Arev shows up in the 11th hour. Amar Ula machlokes ta'amoraim, here is Shita number 1. Davar Torah, echad malve b'shtar, ve'echad malve al peh, gova min chasim mishubadim. Now, this is clearly not how we paskin. We don't paskin that way. We just said a moment ago in our Mishnah that when it comes to certain cases, when you're talking about al peh, you're not gova min chasim mishubadim. It's midoraisa, you are. My time is shibud deoraisa, because your shibud is a shibud deoraisa. The money that that is owed to you is real. Why is it that the Chachamim were oker davar min Torah in this case? Why is it that they say when you're malve al peh, you're only governed from nechasim b'nechor? Mishum pseida de lekuchos. We were afraid. We were afraid that the buyer would never buy, because if he buys and someone can always come and collect from him, even when it's al peh, it's very difficult to conduct business that way, and therefore the Chachamim had a concern. I have a question. I don't know how this works, but if midoraisa it works and the Chachamim needed an override, why would we make an override here of pseida de lekuchos? Just buy a property where the guy doesn't have any liens. Just verify. It seems over here that we are undoing a shibud deoraisa. And by the way, this is also quoted in the Rambam, this shita of Ula, that shibud is deoraisa. And the fact is that because of pseida de lekuchos, we are lenient in the case of milve al peh. If you're concerned about pseida de lekuchos, when milve al peh, why aren't you concerned about pseida de lekuchos, even in a case of shtar? Because he's always assuming some degree of risk, right? So it says the Gemara, there, with a shtar, they themselves are assuming the risk, because when there's a shtar, there's a kol. And this is really the distinction that we need to make. When there's a milve al peh, there's no kol. And there, the pseida de lekuchos, the risk of the lokeach is different, because he can't assume proper risk, because there's no kol in a milve al peh. However, when there's a milve b'shtar, because the shtar is written down, therefore, if I write a shtar to you, everyone's going to say, Karesh owes me money, Karesh. Then the lokeach who's buying from him is going in with open eyes. And that's why Ula distinguishes between a milve al peh, which has no kol, and a milve b'shtar, which does have a kol. All of this is Ula. In sharp contrast, the Gemara says halfway down, right in the middle of the page, and we have about 8 more lines for today, maybe less. The Rabba Amar Davar Torah, the exact opposite. Echad milve b'shtar, Ve'echad milveh v'peh einu govel min chasim b'nei chorin. Really, it's the exact opposite of ula. Really, ledina mida oraisa mina Torah psukim and chumash state. It's not so clear in the chumash, otherwise we wouldn't have a machlokas. But mida oraisa he holds milveh al peh, even milveh b'shtar is only govel min chasim b'nei chorin. And my taima, why is that the case? Because as the Gemara says, shibuda lav doraisa. So machlokas between Rabba and Ula as to whether or not a shibud is doraisa. Okay, umatam amru malve bishtar govim minachasem mishubadim. Why is it that when we have something written in a document, then we allow someone to collect beyond the scope of chumash, beyond the scope of Torah, even from the chasim mishubadim? Says the Gemara, shelo tinol deles bifnei lovin. We want to create a scenario where a person is willing to borrow. People need to borrow money. And if we say that a person can only collect from the chasim b'nei chorin, only from b'nei chorin, and not from the mishubadim, the loan system is going to be a little shver. It's going to be a little weak. And here too, we want to be sensitive. If you're concerned about shalotino dalas b'fnei lovin, malve al peh nami, perhaps we should also be concerned about a case of milve al peh. That maybe by milve al peh we'll have a case of shalotino delas bifnei loven, and therefore we should allow for the love to collect even from the chasim mishubadim. Says the Gemara, nope, hasam les lei kala, nothing to worry about. In that case over there with the milve al peh, there's no kol, and in such a case we need to limit what we allow the love to collect, and if a love wants to be able to collect from the chasim mishubadim, he should write a shtar. As you can see from the next words of Miyamar Rabba Hachi, we're going to question whether or not Rabba holds that way. But we will pause here for tonight, 2/3 of the way down. The first word on the line is Miyamar Rabba, and then in Mirza Hashem tomorrow we'll finish up the Masechta in just about an amud and a half. And great to be back learning with you. Wishing you all a beautiful night.